So while I was cleaning my room today, I was listening to these videos about this guy who was building his cabin in the woods, off grid, super cool, right? And I was like, oh, that's something I want to do today. But then eventually when a break came in my cleaning, I don't know, I stopped and reflected for a moment. I really thought about, how 2024 ended and how we're going into 2025 and how as a culture, or at least within my generation, we have this certain obsession over what we would used to call the romantic life. This life that is defined by, like the travel through the nature will save us, right? We go on these almost spiritual journeys, except we leave at home the spiritual part and just go at the journey. And it's all general revelation, really. It's trying to know God just through one of the ways he reveals himself and forgetting that there is another special type of revelation that is very personal and something that we have as part of our life to work out our salvation with fear and trembling and really to build that connection. I think that is one of the most foundational points, and I think is something I would like to put in the context of a debate about, how exactly will works out a little bit, and us being given it so that we may forfeit it, how God's sacrifice extends to us, this general thing that comes to everyone, and then a more special spiritual gift of the Holy Spirit and how exactly that manifests. But aside from that point, we have this romanticism, and the title I wrote here on my paper title is The Resurgence of the Romantic Life. Are you shaped by culture today? Because that's really what I was thinking about. So I was like, man, we have this resurgence of the romantic life due to the fact that no one has studied it. No one knows this idea, and it's kind of back here with our cultural program. But of course, everything is, I think nowadays, it's a lot more exaggerated due to the interconnectivity of the internet. Ideas are more quickly spread and more quickly extinguished. However, the fire of our ideas and reason burns hotter. However, it goes out quicker in an interesting way due to social media and the internet. But are you shaped by culture today? Because, I sat there and thought to myself, I asked, why am I watching this video of building a house off the grid? What gave me the self-perception that is going to be the thing that saves me? Why do I go camping so much? Why do I feel like this is going to be the thing that saves me? And so a long introduction aside, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today, is the resurgence of the ideal romantic life and how I think as Christians we have to oppose it. The thing I want to really talk about is, I guess, first how this manifests in our culture. So the first post I wrote down is the new romantic life. I think the most, tangible manifestations are it is just, how popular country music has gotten, seemingly out of nowhere. I believe Zach Bryan has really popped off a lot, but I think he's really changed a lot of all of our own perceptions. I think a lot about self-perception, how we see ourselves. And this is a rhetorical question I wrote when I was journaling about this is, for my self-perception, do I only see the things that culture tells me are valuable? For example, if everyone's loving these country songs and these Zach Bryan songs, and my father was built on a farm, me, my father, and my grandfather were all born in the same small town in Oklahoma. I love that farm, love going there a lot. My dad, when I was raised, growing up, it was always a big part of him to give me as much as he could, even though, we lived on only an acre in Houston. Just for where he had to work. And so I guess the question here is, do I identify so much with that part of me because culture tells me that part of me is valuable and because I put the lens on it, or is there another reason? So that's a rhetorical question I felt really convicted by. And I think that's something we all need to apply, right? Is when we are having our own self-perception on ourselves, are we only looking for the things that culture says is valuable? Is that how limited in our reason capacities we are, that we can't go a step further and think, well, maybe what does God love most about me? But that's not really why I think about it as much. I turn on my Zach Bryan songs, I think that guy was born an hour from me, and I think about that. And there's just kind of a point there that I thought was interesting. Two manifestations, country music and also national park. And also a third manifestation, this one doesn't apply to me as much, but old stuff remembering a simpler time. First thing I wanted to point out is a sense of irony about this all, really. We've come to worship nature as almost our escape, yet we still poison it because it gives us easier parts of life. Just at the most simplest level, I scroll on Instagram, I look for all these places I'm going to go see, and what I'm not really thinking about is how this whole line of me using my phones and being dependent on this power is in turn killing nature so that I might view it, so that I might worship it. It's really very ironic. I want to say there's nothing wrong, I think, with wanting to go on these trips to the mountains or loving the countryside. I think those things are amazing, and they're part of who many of us are today. I think, as C.S. Lewis would put it, the problem is not that we care about it, the problem is that we don't ask for enough, as he had said in Weight of Glory. I think the problem with it is we've taken these spiritual journeys, like going on these big trips, and we've dropped the spirit part, and we've just gone on the journey, and we really have no point or reason to do it. And so that's something, again, I guess I'd challenge you with is, it's not bad to go to the mountains, but it really matters the intent for why you did it. And that really is a big factor between what makes a good trip and a bad one. I know for me, when I went to Peak Wheeler, I did it at first on a spiritual sense, and I was spending a lot of reflection on Wheeler, but by the time I got to White Sands, I was just having fun. And the part of that trip I remember and love and cherish the most was Wheeler. And that's the practical notion of life. This is, I think, what we're all trying to escape, but we have to realize it's not inherently bad. And I want to talk about this a little bit later, right? As Tocqueville said in 1850 or whenever he was writing Democracy in America, he talked about how in America everything is practically focused. And I get this, right? I'm at college, like literally all of my life since I got here is come here, make so you can make money. And, you know, I'm always thinking about money, scholarships, and things like that. What I've learned in my course of studies, though, while being here is this is just one of the calls to life. That's the thing I want to point out here, is I feel like a lot of, with the romantic ideals as well, is we see practicality, we see how lifeless it is, and so we do our best to kind of throw it away and make decisions that aren't really true. But I do think there's an inherent Christian calling to the practical life, but there also is one to this other life, which we might say is a more spiritual side to it, and we have to balance both of those, and that's a topic for a different day. What I want to talk about, the second main point or takeaway is we have begun to idealize someone else's self-perception of what the ideal word is. That's a bunch of word jumble. Let me explain it. Right, so instruments behind me. I've been playing the guitar. This one's my roommate's, but I've been playing my guitar for about 2 or 3 months. I've written lots of songs, and I want to use one of those as an example, right? If I write a song about a memory that I have, the point of that song is I have that memory, but I also have this really strong emotion tied to it. But the problem is a lot of what we've done as a culture is we've taken that memory that I write about in the song, and that has become what we worship and glorify, and we kind of leave the peaceful part at the end. Like, for example, I guess me, in some way, I have this idea, like, at the end of my life, I'll be this memory of, like, it's not a memory, but it's a projection of the ideal life for me. I'll be sitting on top of a hay bale in Oklahoma. I love sitting on top of hay bales, you know. Maybe it's I have a beautiful woman with me. Maybe I have it's my guitar, you know, a future wife, or just a future song that I write that just means a lot to me. And I have this everlasting peace as the sun sets, knowing that I've done well in life. The problem is really what we've done in the modern era is we've just worshipped the physical manifestation of that, which is the hay bale, the sunset, the music, the women, and we've really forgot about the part of it, which was that everlasting peace from having a good life. And the Lord is saying to us on our final day, well done, my good and faithful servant. And that's Genesis, right? You know, this whole, you know, he created this world, and then he sat there as a God who's in and outside of time. Inside time, he said, this is good. Outside of time, he says, this is good. At the end of all of this, every knee will bow and say that I am Lord, and this is good, and this will praise me. That's a complex topic, and, you know, if we want to talk about will and destiny in that, I'd love to talk about that a little bit more, but that's a topic for another day. The point being, simply put, is we cannot find ourselves worshiping the manifestation and then forgetting the ideal. Again, Wheeler was special because I quit my job on having a spiritual experience here at college, kind of somewhat. Again, I could explain that a little bit later. It was a very practical minded one. You know, as I heard a sermon, the sermon convicted me, and I was like, well, worst case scenario, I lose a job, but I did it for the Lord, so I don't think he's going to punish me for that. Just my bank account will be a little bit more empty, right? So, you know, I kind of thought about that. And, you know, if you read Wordsworth, William Wordsworth, he wrote, like, the romantic book, right? The Prelude. And I encourage you to read this book if you're artsy or musical at all like me, because I read this book and I was like, I could have written this thing. But what surprised me at the very end of this book, you know, he's done the romantic life. He's traveled, he's gone, he's seen the mountains, seen the nations, seen the people, and seen them well. Right? And at the end of it, he says, yeah, so actually all life's about people. Is even the book about the romantic life concludes with people. And so I want to talk about the synthesis of how we can operate within that as Christians. But again, the point here is Wordsworth throughout his whole life sought to seek God only through this general revelation. Again, what should have been a spiritual hiatus, you know, maybe you go to a mountain on a spiritual retreat or do a Bible study. Instead, it's just go to the mountain and you forego completely the special spiritual part of that. And I think that's the thing as a generation which we have to renew our minds to, is it is not the journey to the mountains that will save you. It is in fact the journey home. It is the reminder, at least it was for me when I traveled to Peak Wheeler. It was after 2,000 miles of driving and seeing almost the entire, the tip of New Mexico to the bottom of New Mexico. White Sands to Wheeler. It was figuring out that my purpose was specific for me at home. I have that poem up on my Instagram. I forget it exactly. That's what it was to me, is, through traveling all that time, I found that God placed me here for a specific reason. And when I thought about here, there were specific things in my life, specific moments that just kind of fell into place that I could track. But there, it was kind of the pointless perspective. It's a spiritual journey. Yeah, so we've worshipped the manifestation and not the ideal. So then the Christian life, and how does that interact? Quick segue before I get into all of this. I know I'm very preachy. That's just how I am. I'm the type, this. I say as fact. Really, this is all a big question. It's hopefully not a 20-minute. Hopefully, it's going to be only 15 minutes. But it's supposed to be a question about our lives and what we believe. And that's kind of the point of it, right? The point is not that I speak any of this as truth. The point is to get us thinking to that second call, other than practicality, to the imago Dei, to our human rationality. If we are offering our lives as a living sacrifice, that is in the practical portion. I do these practical actions of my life unto the Lord, but I also give my mind unto the Lord to convene with the ideas placed before me within my life, or the things set upon my heart. Third point, and yet our purpose is people. Ooh, I hate that sentence. I will admit, when I was further into this little rabbit hole of romanticism, as I may have been, often have been, I was like, you know what? I don't really need people, man. People were annoying, were decrepit. And so first segue on ethics that I want to talk about. We need to talk about the positivity of life. And this one, you don't have to be a Christian to think about ethics this way. I could explain it in a non-Christian manner, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to explain it with the presuppositions I've been provided by my denominations. If we are fallen, then life is not about refraining from evil, and it is about doing good. And so then and there, in an utmost manner, the idea of the romantic life becomes really consequential, right? Because if I travel to the mountains and I refrain from people, and then I refrain from actions, then a lot of my life there is just about refraining from doing bad, right? While I'm in the mountains, I have little opportunity to do good, unless you are of the belief that, you could pick acorns off and plant them, and that's good. But really in the most fundamental ethical sense, and you're talking about people, your life isn't really about doing good to people. So you ask yourself, what is goodness? What is this kind of ethical life that I'm called to as a person, and I believe as a Christian? And you get to a more positive sense. You read the end of the Gospels, you read the introduction of the Acts of the Apostles, you see people living in community, living this life that's founded upon giving up things and living for people. And thus, I think, in a way that we've forgotten, that as Christians, one of our chief purposes is people, right? And that's obviously two-part, right? I mean, there's an inherent call to our one-on-one relationship with God, but there's an inherent manifestation of that looks like, treating better. That's a segue in ethics. The synthesis of the romantic and the Christian life, if you want one. I was thinking about this because, I was sitting there, I'm like, well, I don't want to give up my, idea of one day having my time on Oklahoma, my hay bales, my this or that. I mean, it is what my ancestors have done since they came to Oklahoma, with the exception of my father, who still throughout the course of his life has done his best to include that heritage within me. And as his only son, and as the last of my grandfather's grandchildren bearing the name of that I want to continue. So I ask myself then, is it contrary to the Christian life? I don't believe so. I do believe there's a synthesis. I think it's simple. I think the romantic life is not the thing we run away to. It is not this general revelation that is going to save us all. But it can be a home base of operations that we use to steady ourselves as we go out into the world. I mean, we have part of our call, or at least one of the things mentioned to us in the Bible that we could live out, and I do think we should live out, is the renewing of our minds. And I think that is more easily done in a place where it is less distracting. I do think it is a lot more, in terms of Tocqueville, practical, instead of going on these big spiritual journeys that are life-defining, to instead have your own quiet place of solitude. It may start as your library, or it may manifest fully into a home that's 20 miles from town, not fully independent, of course, not taken away from society, but where you can have a more controlled environment when you raise your kids, and for you to renew your mind in the future. And I believe that's the synthesis there. And so I really do, as we work through the task of the Christian life, and we wonder what it is, and we contemplate the things of the romantics, the mountains, the societies, I think go, make it a spiritual journey, or go with friends and take special time to invest in them. I know for me, I'm going to the Wichita Mountains. That one was really, it was about seeing people I hadn't seen in a long time, like really spending time with them. But it honestly was also, just practicing living simply there and bringing it back home, and remembering that, I get so caught up in the this or that and the other thing of school, when in reality, I can live on $35 lasts me 2 days, and it's 2 of the best days I had this year, um, they're up there. They're up there. Those days in Wichita, the Wichita Wildlife Refuge thing. That is the synthesis I offer. Runaway versus base of operations, maybe. So then, takeaway thoughts. I mentioned all of this is not a point, a question, nor all of this is not a point, but it's a question. It's not speech, but it's an idea to give us rhetorical insight. So with all these 17 minutes gone by of my unedited raw rambling, what are our takeaways and things? Yours, I hope, are different from mine, but these are the 3 I took away. The task of renewing our minds, and how easily are we shaped by culture. When I think of myself, is it the reflection on the music I listen to that is making me think about how much I miss the time I've spent in punk as a kid? Or is it something more, like a love of family, a love of my grandfather and who he was, how much I just randomly think about him? I wear his hats. I got all these hats from him. He used to hum all the time, and that's something that, I used to always do as a kid that I got from him. And every now and then I'll just be humming, and I'm like, man, that's so funny. I am my father's and his father's son. But it's just really coming to renewing our minds to, where do these things come from? Our self-perception, what we perceive as valuable within ourselves, where does it come from? Here's another one. I didn't get to talk about this. I didn't want to waste it as a whole point, but I think it's important. We are the invisible hand that has built this world. If you take any introduction to economics class, more specifically, especially the macro courses, they talk about the invisible hand. Do not forget, the invisible hand is you, me, and everyone else in this universe. It is the culmination of our desire, perpetuated and manifested in an economy. And so it is literally what we all want in a perfect democracy. And kind of think about that. And you think about, well, we all say we want to run away, but then we don't. We buy these other products, and I don't know, it's just irony. We've created this world that we are unhappy with. That is. Self-perception, manifestation versus the ideal. For me, it is not that my life will only be sunset and glorious if I sit atop a hay bale with a beautiful woman with my guitar and watch the sunset fall. It is instead glorious if I, at one moment in my life, sit and I say, well, what I've done is good, and it will benefit the future. And thus we recognize that our life is not for ourselves. It is not about building that manifested dream, but is instead about finding the ideals which I believe are endowed to us by a creator, and living out those. So in 20 minutes, there are Brennan's thoughts in 2025 of what I feel like is something that we just need to renew our minds to. And that is this resurgence of the romantic, and how easily we all are shaped by what we listen to and what we see on our iPhones. Our purpose is people. And for that reason alone, we must remind ourselves not to run away and not to forget what has been given. Weezy out of here.